Hey, James McWilliams, how you doing, man?
Good, John. How are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you very much for joining me to talk about this amazing poet, Everette Maddox. Thank you for your patience with our technological problems. Hopefully we got it right here. Let's start. Why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are?
Sure. I'm James McWilliams, and I am a history professor at Texas State University, where I've been for going on 26 years now. I've done work in a lot of fields of American history, but for the last decade, I've been focusing on the work of a Southern poet named Frank Stanford, and I have just completed a biography of Frank Stanford. It took me about 8 years to write, research and write, and that comes out this summer with the University of Arkansas Press. And the other project Stanford-related project that I'm excited about is I'm editing the third edition of his major work called The Battlefield Where the Moon Says I Love You. It's a 15,263 line, obviously epic poem, and that will come out next year as well. And so right now I'm just finishing the introduction to that work. So I've been thoroughly consumed with the poetry and life of Frank Stanford really for the last almost decade of my career.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. And for those of you who are watching these episodes, we just had an episode on Frank Stanford's poem "Kite Tied to a Tombstone." And man, I'm really looking forward to both of those things coming out. And I know Frank will come up in this conversation today, not only because you're so immersed in him, but because there are some connections here, I think, with Everett Maddox. Um, we could go down this rabbit hole for a long time, but let me just ask you quickly, maybe the short answer to how does a history professor spend 10 years on a Southern relatively obscure poet?
Right. So the project actually began as a kind of much more expansive history of culture in the American South after World War II. And for a wide variety of reasons, I just couldn't get it to work. But I was trying to kind of integrate about 30 to 40 writers and artists and musicians. And one afternoon, I just got so frustrated with the project and sort of turned it on its head and kind of shook the project. And Frank Stanford sort of fell out. And I knew he's got an archive at the Beinecke Library at Yale. I knew there was no biography written on him, and I was aware, and I've been reading Stanford since 2000. I'm aware that he has a really dedicated cult following, so I knew there would be, some interest in this work, and so those are kind of the forces that led me into the biography. I mean, I have to say that if I would have known it would take me so long, I might have reconsidered. He only lived 29 years. He died by suicide in 1978. And so I thought, well, how long can it take to write about somebody's life if they only live 29 years? Well,
Yeah,
doesn't work that way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, he is incredibly fascinating for sure. I wonder, Lucinda Williams' biography has several pages dedicated to him, and
Yeah, her memoir. You mean, yeah, her memoir.
right, right, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, and I just wonder if that's going to help kind of spread the word about Frank. I think it will, which
Yeah,
is
it already has a little bit. I mean, I've gotten several emails from people who learned about Stanford through her memoir, and I was fortunate enough to get to look at that when it was in draft form and sort of have a little bit of input on Frank's history. Yeah.
yeah, cool. Well, let's jump into Maddox,
Yeah.
and you chose the poem New Orleans, which is amazing, and we will definitely want to look at that. But I can't help myself. I need to bring up a few other
Yeah.
poems in this volume.
Yeah.
I also want to read a couple of things from Ralph Adamo's introduction. Let me first read it, and then I'll have you read it when we to sign us off here in a bit. The poem's called New Orleans for Ralph Adamo. From the air, it's all puddles, a blue-green frog town on lily pads, more canals than Amsterdam. You don't land, you sink. When we met, you the native, shook your head. Sweat dropped on the bar. You said, "You're sunk. You won't write a line. You won't make a nickel. You won't hit a lick at a snake in this antebellum sauna bath. You won't shit in the morning if you don't wake up with your pants down." And you were right. 3 years later, I'm in it up to my eyebrows, stalled like a streetcar. My life is under the bed with the beer bottles. I'll never write another line for anything but love in this city where steam rises off the street after a rain like bosoms heaving.
Uh, how do you do that?
My
How does
life is
that
under the
happen?
bed. My life is
Right.
under the bed with the beer bottles. That's the line that just got me for some reason. And I think it's interesting that he doesn't say, "I am under the bed with the beer bottles." My life is under the bed with beer bottles. Let me just ask you, if you don't mind, talk about this poem a little bit, why you chose it.
Well, there's a number of reasons. One of the things that I really love about this poem um, is the way it moves. I mean, you start way up in the sky in an airplane, and it's all puddles, and then, as you just referenced, by the end, you're under the bed with the beer bottles, and the poem just goes from the sky to the street very quickly. It's not a long poem. And I think, Maddox, even though his poems have the feeling sometimes of being just tossed off, and I think some of them might have been tossed off,
Sure.
I think this is one of the Maddox poems where he crafted it for a long time. And one, I think, particular word that highlights the thought and the craft that went into it is sweat doesn't drip on the bar, it drops. And that's exactly what this poem does. This poem drops. It doesn't drip. It happens very quickly. And so I guess, yeah, like, and another thing on the craft element of this poem that I really like is I like the conversation wedged into the middle of the poem. You don't see that very often. And there's something, I think, reflective of Maddox's humility there in some ways. It's like, I'm going to step aside and I'm going to let my friend Ralph come in and have a word in this poem of mine, and then I'm going to finish it up. Two more quick reasons why I love this poem. The ending, which we can talk about later, but it's surprise. Yeah, it's a surprise. You're under the bed with their beer bottles. You think everything's gone to shit, but you've got this little moment of beautiful, sensual, sexual, hope at the end. And then finally, just for personal reasons. I mean, New Orleans is my favorite city in the world. I've kind of had my own um, I haven't dropped maybe the way Maddox has, maybe a few times on a few occasions, but I have really found a home in that city, and I've been going there since I was a kid. But in the last few years, especially since I've been working on the Stanford biography, um, I've been able to spend many many months out of the year there, and I feel a deep affiliation for the city, and I can just identify with that poem in so many ways.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Yeah, and of course the idea of it sinking, the city of New Orleans is sinking
All right.
as well. Yeah, let's maybe talk around about Maddox a little more broadly, and then we'll come back to this poem. Andrei Codrescu called him the Christ of New Orleans. He was a poet and died for it. Wow.
Mhm.
What do you suppose Everett would say if he heard himself referred to as the Christ of New Orleans?
I don't know what Maddox would say, but I can talk a little bit about why I think Kudreshu described him that
Nice.
way. There was a real sweetness and generosity to Rhett Maddox. He was, by any standard, brilliant. He was remarkably well read. He memorized pages and pages of literature and would routinely recite these at the bar and wind up in tears. He was so moved by what he had memorized and what he was reciting. And You know, a lot of people who have that level of erudition can be bullies, they can be intimidating, they can be competitive. And Maddox was the opposite. He was remarkably intelligent and remarkably well read, but he was a teacher. He wanted to share that with you. And there's one line I just want to read very briefly from a poem of his called Even Odd. And I'm just going to read the end of it. It says, "Can you feel that? That's your heart doing that. That's your heart laughing at the language. The language wants to love you. Let it." Man, you read that, and I mean, it almost chokes me up every time because if you are somebody who's moved by language and moved by literature, that's what Maddox does for you. He says, look, this is this world in front of you, and I'm going to help you find things maybe that you haven't seen. So I think that's where the Christ comes. I mean, you end up following him because he's got a gift
Yeah.
and you want to be part of it.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Let me, if I may, read a couple of very small snippets from Ralph Adamo's introduction to this book, and have you comment on that, and also I want you to maybe tell us a little bit about Adamo himself. But
Sure.
this little paragraph struck me here. In order to begin talking about them, and by them he's referring to the poems, we need to refer once again to his life. It was a life that illustrates, while demonstrating, contradictory visions of the artist. On one hand, he was entranced by and wished to emulate an idea of glamour, as portrayed by Scott and Zelda, for one example that contains the seeds of its own contradiction. On the other hand, he was chronically broke, out of work, and not much interested in getting into it. Homeless, not only literally, under the influence from drink served in places that would not be mistaken for glamorous, and in his case, in the end, literally starving. But Maddox was too the professional, the conservative in taste with no obvious interest in politics, the one to whom clothes and manners mattered, whether or not he could maintain appearances in either regard. His poetry also bears the distinction of being almost entirely about himself and the life he was living, spoken in a voice that was unmistakably the poet pretending to be none other than himself.
It's hard to improve on that. I mean, that's just pure Ralph Adamo. He reads people so well and is a wonderful poet. And yeah, that is great. I mean, Maddox was he was the shabby aristocrat. You know, he was wandering around New Orleans in a seersucker suit with holes in the elbows, and there was something aristocratic about his bearing and demeanor. And he would be sleeping in the park sometimes, or sleeping in a car, or crashing on, friends' sofas, or sleeping in the Maple Leaf Bar. And it's maybe all too easy to romanticize that kind of disposition, but I don't think Adamo's doing that at all. I think he's just laying it out and saying this was Everette Maddox, and he was pure in that respect.
Yeah. And I know I've asked you before, are you, now that you're wrapping up with Frank Stanford, are you going to be the one who's going to write the biography of Everette Maddox? And you've
No, I don't
said
think
no.
I
You've
would
said
never write
no.
another biography.
But let me just
I would
read
love I
this.
would love to write a book on Maddox's poems,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I mean, without getting into it too much, so much, and what I learned is so much of the work in writing a biography is it's so unstimulating. It's like, how can I get his fourth grade report card?
Yeah.
And no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Well,
it's
let me
done.
let me try to encourage you, though. Another section from Adamo's introduction. It is my hope and assumption that we will have a collected poems within a reasonable time, and that it will include not only the work in the 4 books from which this selection was made, but also work newly found that as yet remains lost in various places. It was not easy leaving a coherent legacy when he had no place to call home and no place to collect and organize his body of work. I anticipate as well collections of letters and the biography that some exceptional chronicler will one day undertake. Well, if
Okay,
it's
so
not,
I'm going to just text Ralph right now and tell him he needs to write the
there
biography.
you go. There you go. Say if you can quickly who Ralph Adamo is.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph was born and raised in New Orleans. I got to know Ralph very well because he was a contemporary of Frank Stanford's. They knew each other in Fayetteville in the early 70s and stayed friends all the way through Frank's death in 1978. Ralph was my single greatest supporter during the biography, a great source of information, but also a great friend. He is a cultural legend in New Orleans. He is at the center of the literary community. He's a great poet himself. He knows all the poets in the city. He knows all the musicians in the city, and just a great champion of writers and poets and musicians. And so it makes perfect sense for Everette Maddox to wander into New Orleans from Tuscaloosa, find Ralph Adamo, and for Ralph Adamo to sit down at the bar with him and say, "Hey man, you're an alcoholic and you're a brilliant poet and you probably should leave. This is not the city for you because this is the city that if you want to sink, again, that word, I mean, if you want to sink or drop into debauchery,
You will.
no one's going to tell you no. No one's going to say, hey, there's something wrong with going to the bar at 10 a.m. because it's a city full of people who do that. And Adamo knew that very well. And so I think there's probably some truth to that moment in the poem where Adamo says, no, get out. You're in trouble here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to cheat and read another poem here, but I just read this one for the first time this morning, and
Oh,
it
which
really
one?
knocked What I Said to the Sky, because it's one of the last poems in this volume, and I'm just guessing it was probably one of the very late poems that he wrote, but it really does show him, I think, on that last leg. After New Orleans has pretty much taken the starch out of the man. It's called What I Said to the Sky. I reeled out of a 6 martini candlelit dinner and stood in the usual gutter, clutching what was left of the 20th century, and looked up into a sky the color of a bruise. It looked like Mr. Hyde in Classics Illustrated, and I shook my fist at the God that had vacated years ago, overdue on the moral rent, and said, I came up a romantic idealist, and life has made me a mean, cynical, pessimistic pissant. Fuck
Mm,
you and the clouds you rolled in on. And
mm.
some wise ass passerby said, but what about Susie? And I said, Susie blew the last blast on my toy trumpet, that's all.
Oh, I mean, there's such a sweet fatalism to his work. Um, Susie was a bartender that he adored at the Maple Leaf, and he would write these just charming lines to her on napkins and hand them over the bar to her. Susie, you have eyes like bumblebees, and these were collected. I mean, going back to like where is his archive? The Historic New Orleans of Collection has some of his papers, and there is a folder of some of these napkins as well. But yeah, I mean, that poem that you read, if I can just read very quickly the opening to another poem called Irrelevant. Actually, I'll just read the whole thing. It's only a few lines.
Yeah, right
I'm
on.
not going to dignify Mozart or metaphysics any longer by pretending they touch me. I won't even say I like these leaves except as they swirl against a special emptiness. Nothing is relevant since losing you is what my life is about. I mean, it's just that kind of there's love, there's beauty, there's sadness, and there's fatalism. And Maddox, everyone in his family died before 50. I think he knew he was doomed from the start. And that kind of, there's a kind of dark humor to his doom, but really at the end of the day, you end up just wanting to sit down and weep, after reading some of these poems because
Yeah.
they're so painful, but they're also so funny and sweet. I really can't think of a poet who manages to do that as well as he does. But I think it derives from a humility. I think it derives from the willingness to be self-deprecating and to, in some ways, kind of embrace the fact that he was a drunk. He doesn't run from it. He doesn't hide from it. He never apologizes for it. He makes poetry out of it.
Yeah. I feel the need, and we're kind of bouncing around, but that's okay. I feel the need to show his sweet side a little bit since we've shown that side.
Yeah, yeah.
And so let me read a poem I know you love called Welcome Home.
Oh, yeah.
I understand. For years, perhaps you have lived underground, handling only darkness. You have not become accustomed to it. You want to get out. One day, you find an object which may be a chair, at any rate, a surface. Standing on this dark thing, you reach up. Here at the top, the smell is oppressive, sweet. You almost fall, but you push, and the top begins to crack. Plaster or something falls around you. Emerging, you know the smell. Cake. Noise. Lights. You are outside, standing giddily on the top, swathed in ribbons. And there are all your friends, dressed up, half drunk. The applause is enormous. It is a party for you. One of the crowd, the drunkest and happiest, shrilling through a megaphone, "Welcome home," is me.
Yeah, I mean that was published in the Paris Review, and very early in his career. There's his poems that are intimately linked with New Orleans, and then there's a poem like that one which just has this universal reach. I love so many things about that poem, and oddly enough, the thing I maybe love most about it, aside from the great ending, is something I don't understand, which is a chair, or a chair, or some hard surface, plaster, or something. There's almost this sort of deflecting from the details as he's going through the poem. And I don't know if it's his way of saying, hey, look, like these details don't really matter. I know I have to include them in order to have this image of this woman climbing through the ceiling. But what really matters is what's
Or,
going to
or,
happen
or popping out of a cake.
or popping out of a cake or climbing, yeah, whatever. But
That was that smell. You broke through the plaster and it turns out to be cake. It's that sweet smell. That's the image
yeah,
I have of a
yeah,
woman coming out of a cake.
yeah, no,
Although,
yeah, exactly.
and so the chair or any surface, there's going to be something that's going to allow you the purchase to be able to rise. Something
Yeah.
you can you can push yourself off from the bottom upwards. Is that's the only thing I get from that.
No, that's right. And I think it's just interesting to me how Maddox chooses not to specify to specify and then to say, but I'm not sure. And the maybe there's a sense that this upward trajectory is unclear. It's an upward trajectory, but we don't know where that person is going,
Yeah.
or what's going to happen when they break through. But it's interesting. What a great, I'm only realizing it now, what a great juxtaposition to New Orleans, which moves in the exact opposite direction
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
poem.
He,
So,
he's very much about rising and sinking, isn't he?
yeah, I mean, he
Yeah.
is.
I'm going to cheat one more time and read another poem here, and then let's return to the poem at hand, New Orleans. You and I have talked about this one. It's just so powerful. I'm going to try to find it quickly here. It's the hypothetical self epitaph.
Yeah.
Hypothetical self epitaph. What if I just caved in, gave out, pulled over to the side? Let me start over. What if I just caved in, gave out, pulled over to the side of the road of life, and expired like an old driver's license? You might say he didn't get far in 31 years, but I'd say that's all right. It was the world's longest trip on an empty tank.
Yeah, I mean, there we are, back to that fatalism, back to
Yeah,
that self-deprecation.
yeah, yeah. But also kind of a wry humor about it.
Oh
You know,
yeah, like an
uh,
old driver's license. I mean, what a great image.
yes, yes, and hey, it's not so bad. I got a long way on this empty tank. Yeah,
Made it 31 years, man.
that's right. That's right. Now, I wonder, we don't want to go too far down that poem, but that's the thing about this book, man. You read one poem and you read the next, and it takes you to another one. And he's so good, man. He's so good. Thank you so much for turning me on to him. And
Yeah.
uh, we have not mentioned yet the bar. What's it called? And the readings that he started
Oh, the Maple Leaf. Yeah.
at the
So
Maple
again,
Leaf. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, this sort of swings back to Maddox's, generosity and his deep desire to connect with other human beings over literature. He started a poetry reading at the Maple Leaf Bar where he effectively lived. And it's still going today. I think it's the longest running poetry reading series in the South. You can go to the Maple Leaf any Sunday at 4:20 in the afternoon, and there will be somebody reading poetry. And again, it's all legacy to Everette Maddox, whose ashes are actually scattered behind the bar at the Maple Leaf, and there's a little plaque there where you can find a recognition of him. But yeah, I mean that's again, I think Maddox just thrilled and other people thrilling in literature. He wanted to find people to connect with, and sometimes it was his poetry, sometimes it was other poetry that was read, but a real celebration of really the most simple and one of the more simple and beautiful pleasures in life, which is just being moved by literature, by literary expression.
Yeah. Is it coincidental that those readings are at 4:20?
Yeah, I don't know. No, probably not.
I don't associate him with
Yeah.
anything other than alcohol in terms of recreational.
Yeah, this might be a reflection more of today's poets rather than Everette Maddox. There was no like designated hour or for Maddox's drinking. It was nonstop.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's return to the poem New Orleans and finish up with it.
Yeah.
I would love you to read it to take us out, but before we do, let's see if there's anything else we want to say about it.
You
Excuse me. Excuse me. Let's see here. Yeah, so we have this the movement as you referred to of the poem. It starts up almost like you're flying in, looking down at New Orleans and seeing these canals, and you don't land, you sink. And yeah, I love the thank you for mentioning the sweat dropped. That's so interesting instead of dripped. I think that's significant that he chose that, and I think you're right that it is a one moment in this poem that shows craft as opposed to something just tossed off. I'll bet he originally wrote dripped and then came back to drop, but who knows? And then we have Adamo in the poem basically telling him, "You're sunk. Yeah, be careful, dude."
Yeah, this is not the place for you. And of
Right.
course, it was. Yeah, it was his place, but it killed him and it made him brilliant.
That's right. And I love the couple of little moments of alliteration, like stalled like a streetcar. That's really nice. And my life is under the bed with the beer bottles is the one that, I mean, I'll never forget that line.
Yeah.
It's just so strong. And
Well,
again,
we've all been there,
yeah,
I mean, again, it's there's a universal appeal to so much of his work.
yeah. But again, it's not I am under the that's really significant for me. I'm not sure quite why, but it's not I am under the bed with the beer bottles. It's my life. That's where my life is. That's where my life has become. It's become under the bed. And also under the bed has we hide under the bed. There's that almost I don't know that that's his intention at all, but when I hear something is under the bed, to me that says something's hiding. Does that do anything
I
for
think
you?
that's right. Yeah.
But
And
he did
then
not hide. He did not hide, as you pointed out. He was out there, no apology. He was completely out there showing himself to the world and everyone
well,
around him. So he
yeah,
wasn't
I mean, I think
hiding.
so. But somebody who drinks that excessively could be said to be hiding something for sure.
Good.
And maybe that's implied in this line. I'm not sure. I'm actually just now realizing I'm really glad you raised this distinction between I am under the bed versus my life is under the bed because there's no I in the whole poem. Oh, there is. I'm
I'm
sorry. I'll
I'm
never write another line. Yeah. Okay.
I'm in it up to my eyebrows, and
Yeah.
I'll never
Yeah.
write.
Yeah.
But
So
not
actually,
much.
can I say something? All right.
No, what were you going to say?
Can I say something about that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'll never write another line. So that comes on the heels of I'm under the bed with their beer bottles, and then I'll never write another line. And you have this great enjambment. for anything but love. But for a split second, as a reader, you're thinking, oh,
I'm done.
Adamo was right. He's fucked, And but Everette Maddox says, no, not so fast. I'll never write another line for anything but love. In other words, I'm only going to write about what matters. Thank you, New Orleans, for showing me that. In this city where steam rises off the street after a rain, which is such a vivid image. I mean, New Orleans is a swamp, and after a rain, there steam rises off the street, and then of course, like bosoms heaving. This very sensual, and almost kind of a hot-blooded image. Like, I'm about love. I'm about sensuality. I'm about pleasure. I'm about New Orleans. So no, I will be writing other lines. It's a great ending.
Yeah, it is. Well, would you read the poem from start to finish to take us out here, James?
I will. New Orleans for Ralph Adamo. From the air, it's all puddles. A blue-green frog town on lily pads. More canals than Amsterdam. You don't land, you sink. When we met, you, the native, shook your head. Sweat dropped on the bar. You said you're sunk. You won't write a line. You won't make a nickel. You won't hit a lick at a snake in this antebellum sauna bath. You won't shit in the morning if you don't wake up with your pants down. And you were right. 3 years later, I'm in it up to my eyebrows, stalled like a streetcar. My life is under the bed with the beer bottles. I'll never write another line for anything but love in this city where steam rises off the street after a rain like bosoms heaving.
Fantastic. Well read, my friend. Hey, thank you so much for doing this. We
Enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Yeah.
We'll be in touch. I'll put links in the show notes to you if people want to find out more about you, and very much anticipating the two books you're working on now. And as you know, I'm going to invite you to be on my other podcast to spend a little more time talking about you and Frank Stanford. Looking forward to that, my friend.
Same, John. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.